high-speed train is one of Japan's icons. As it should be, Japan was the first country in the world to bet with certainty on this technology. You see, in order to understand the origin of its high-speed rail network, popularly known as the Shinkansen, we have to go back to the 1950s. At that time, the general opinion was that the railroads were becoming somewhat obsolete, a technology that would sooner or later succumb to the arrival of new highways and air routes. However, one man, Shinji Sogo, president of the National Railway Company, changed the course of transport history. His personal effort to develop a railway that could compete with air routes not only got the Japanese authorities to side with him and his project, it also ended up shaping a high-speed rail system that for the last 5 decades has been the most advanced on the planet. In 1958, the government gave the green light to the first high-speed line which would connect the country's 2 largest cities, Tokyo and Osaka. It began operating in 1964, just in time for the first Tokyo Olympics, and ended up costing 400 billion yen, almost 5% of the country's entire GDP for that year. Now, despite such a huge investment, the truth is the project was overwhelmingly successful. In less than 3 years, it surpassed the 100 million passenger mark. More than 1 billion people used it during the 1970s. Since then, the Shinkansen network hasn't stopped growing. Today, Japan's high-speed railway is owned by profitable private companies. Its network covers almost 3,000 kilometers and transports more than 400 million passengers every year. Thanks to Japan's enormous success, the high-speed dream has become the obsession of governments and politicians across the planet and from every point on the political spectrum. Socialists, conservatives, centrists, everyone has been tickled by this trend. However, outside of Japan, if we talk about high speed, there's one country that stands out above the rest. It may come as a surprise, but this time we're talking about Spain. The Spanish high-speed train, the AVE, has become the jewel of Spanish infrastructure. The AVE has become a source of national pride. It's strange to hear an electoral campaign that doesn't mention it, and it's one of the few public policies that generates a huge consensus among every political group.
Les anuncio que Asturias tendrá un AVE que circulará a 300 km por hora en ancho internacional.
Por eso celebrar la alta velocidad española es celebrar los logros de la España moderna.
However, hold on a second, because what has the AVE really achieved for Spain? Has it really been so successful, and should other countries be copying the Spanish model? Well, in this video, we're going to answer all of these questions.
Está claro que vamos a seguir reivindicando ese AVE que no es otra cosa que pedir lo que tienen todos, o lo que van a tener todos.
An ambitious bet.
First of all, we need to be clear about what a high-speed train is and what it is not. You see, in general, and according to the definitions set out by the International Railroad Union, a high-speed train is a railway whose operating speeds can surpass 250 kilometers or 155 miles per hour. Of course, this is just the lower range. In the countries that have opted for this type of infrastructure, maximum speeds can already exceed 300 kilometers or 185 miles an hour. And it may surprise you, but the Spanish high-speed network is one of the most significant railway networks on the planet. In fact, the ratio between the number of kilometers built or under construction and the number of inhabitants is the highest in the world. Neither Japan, South Korea, nor China surpass Spain. We're talking about 80 kilometers of high-speed track per million inhabitants. Check this out. And if instead of the population we take territory as a reference, the country's surface area, Spain still remains in one of the top positions, taking 3rd place. In this case, it only ranks behind Japan and South Korea. In recent decades, Spain has built a huge high-speed network, a network that currently covers more than 2,800 operational kilometers, with a further 800 kilometers under construction. As you can imagine, building this huge network, it wasn't exactly cheap though. The Spanish government's investment in this infrastructure already exceeds 58 billion euros, a fortune that Spain has funded by taking out loans. As a quick side note here, the influence of this Spanish project doesn't remain exclusively in Spain. Allow me to explain that. Well, thanks to the government's huge investment, today many Spanish companies are doing big business. They've basically managed to develop technology that they're now selling throughout the world. For example, the high-speed lines that are being built in countries such as Saudi Arabia or Uzbekistan have been developed with the help of these Spanish companies. Yes, that's right, even Uzbekistan, perhaps the most remote country in the world, has climbed on board the high-speed train. It's an international trend. But at this point, the question we really have is this: can such a huge public investment be justified because it helps a few private companies to increase their competitiveness? But more about that a bit later. First, we need to know where this story began, so listen up.
Spain's golden year.
1992 is a year that will be recorded in the memory of Spaniards for decades. That year, Spain swept the board by securing every major international event. Madrid was chosen as the European capital of culture, Barcelona hosted the Olympic Games, and Seville organized one of the most ambitious universal exhibitions in recent decades. In that year, Spain seemed to be king of the hill. It was precisely for that reason that the socialist government of the time, headed by Felipe González, decided to take advantage of this crowded calendar to give Spain's international image a bit of a makeover. The country had to present itself as a modern, thriving, prosperous country, and to achieve that, high-speed trains were one of the government's best bets. But there was a problem, and maybe you noticed it. Barcelona, the other great cultural Spanish city along with Madrid, was hosting the Olympic Games, and Seville, Andalusia's capital, was hosting the Expo. So which city would take the lead? Which train line would have priority? Would it be one that connected Spain's two economic powerhouses, or one that would connect the capital to the south, one of the country's most economically depressed areas? Perhaps the fact that the president of the government was from Seville, or that Andalusia was a stronghold of the Socialist Party, was more of a deciding factor than the economic exploitation criteria. Well, you know how politicians are. The fact is that finally, and after an investment of just over 5 billion euros in today's value, on April the 21st, 1992, the first AVE line between Madrid and Seville was inaugurated. And since then, the AVE has not stopped growing, financed by the Spanish taxpayer and by Europeans who have contributed millions, if not billions, in grants to Spain from the European Union. The fact is that it's been almost 30 years since the line was first inaugurated, more than enough time to review the facts. So how successful has Spain's high-speed project been? Well, you know what? Houston, or rather Madrid, we have a problem. Spain's experience has been very different from Japan's. So let's take a look.
A flightless bird.
The AVE is a faithful reflection of how politicians often perform. Results are an afterthought. Spain's high-speed train has grown a lot in extension of infrastructure, but not so much in passenger volumes. The result is that today the Spanish high-speed network is one of the most underused networks in the world. The network is used so little that its profitability report is plagued with many red numbers. In fact, the company that manages the infrastructure loses hundreds of millions of euros every single year just maintaining and operating the network. Currently, there isn't a single line that can be justified from an economic perspective. The AVE high-speed railways, especially those designed to go over 300 kilometers per hour, are very expensive to build and very expensive to maintain. The results, as you can see, should make Spanish politicians blush. With this data in hand, it's clear that no line in Spain will ever be profitable. According to studies made by independent foundations such as FIDEA, none of Spain's high-speed networks are beneficial, not even if they factor in social profitability. That is to say, even if they save time on traffic jams or displacements. Not even when you count that are they profitable. In fact, some of the lines even have negative social impact returns. It's all pretty crazy. And if we include financial data, the money that goes in and out, the cold hard cash, then most of the lines will not only never recover the investments made, they won't even cover their operating costs. In other words, this is a hole that swallows tens of billions of euros, and Spain is going to have to keep paying this for decades. And that's not even the worst of it. The worst part is that many of the lines that are currently under construction will have an even more disastrous future. Let me explain in another way. The most attractive lines have already been built, and now this infrastructure is being taken to regions that don't have the basic characteristics that a high-speed train requires. That is, areas with high population density, high economic activity, and high purchasing power. Spain's AVE network is expanding towards territories that don't meet any of these criteria, so future losses of the network are just going to be much greater. A high-speed railway, as Japan has shown, can be useful infrastructure, but only if it's approached with a rational economic set of criteria. Otherwise, it can create a huge hole in the public coffers, a heavy burden on current and future taxpayers. While it's true that public infrastructure can help create wealth, if it isn't executed based on feasibility criteria, it can have the opposite effect. What is good for a politician's campaign isn't necessarily good for the citizens. And in this case, Spain's AVE is a prime example. The enormous investment in the AVE network has led Spain to neglect lines used for moving goods. But the positive impact on both the environment and the competitiveness of Spanish companies would be improved by replacing the transport of goods by road and bringing it back to rail. However, instead, what we find are news stories like this one.
Spain, the EU country that moves the least goods by train.
Spain only moves 1.4% of its goods by train. In fact, in the EU, it's at the bottom of the list, barely beating countries like Luxembourg, Ireland, or Greece. It's quite a mess, really. So why do politicians keep focusing so much on high-speed rail? Well, I guess that's just because opening new lines is pretty popular. Anyway, that's the reality of the Spanish high-speed network. But now it's your turn. What forms of transport do you prefer, and what do you think of high-speed trains? Well, leave your answer in the comments section below, and I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Please do hit that like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.